Hey, what's up, everybody? This is your boy Kenny, and this is Unsung Hollywood Season 3, and this episode is about the Jeffersons. Man, I'm so honored to actually do this review because I am a huge fan of the Jeffersons. This is a show I grew up with, even though by the time this show went off the air, I was 2 years old, but this show has been a real impact on my life, as well as many lives in the black community, as well as the American community, because this was a groundbreaking show that showed African Americans in a positive light, and actually showed us in a different light where, you know, they're also affluent as well as successful black people, and we got to see that on television every week, and that was just groundbreaking in and of itself. But before I get started with this review, let me give my love and condolences to everyone that was affected by the tragedy in Las Vegas, as well as the ones that were affected by the hurricanes Irma, Harvey, Jose, and Maria. If you could give any type of relief or support to everyone that was affected by these tragedies, please do so, because our fellow man needs our help, and we need to be there for one another. Now, on with this review. The Jeffersons actually appeared on primetime in January of 1975, and it lasted for 11 seasons, and it was a groundbreaking show, mainly for the fact that we actually saw a black family living on the Upper East Side of New York, and they were, you know, not the typical, stereotypical roles that were before, like, because at around the, you know, because we did have, like, you know, black sitcoms on before the Jeffersons, like Sanford and Son, you know, a great sitcom, but it took place, you know, in the junkyard. And then you had Good Times, another great groundbreaking show, but it took place in the ghetto. So there was this talk, like, you know, are we just going to always be depicted as, you know, as, like, people who have to work, like, 3 or 4 jobs just to get ahead? Or are we just going to be always depicted as this? And that there's also another side of black life, and the Jeffersons, you know, came to be because we needed to see a different side of black life on television, and the Jeffersons paved the way for a lot of shows. It paved the way for the Cosby Show, as well as, you know, shows like Living Single, where you started to see affluent, on the up, you know, black people making it in the world and actually living good and being entrepreneurs and, you know, running their lives. And it's even a show that inspired me to this day to be my own person and to try to be the best that I can be. And you know, the show was groundbreaking in many ways. I mean, one, you know, Isabel Sanford, who played the role of Louise Jefferson, she, to this day, is the only black woman to win an Emmy for Best Actress in a comedy series. She is the first, and there's never been one after her. And that was definitely a beacon that the Jeffersons laid. Like, they were groundbreaking in more ways than one. Another thing that was groundbreaking is that, you know, they actually showed one of the first interracial couples, you know, on primetime television. You know, the roles of the characters, you know, Tom and Helen Willis, that was played by Roxy Roker, as well as Franklin Cover, and Norman Lear actually, during this episode, he was one of the commentators on this episode. He actually talked about his meeting with Roxy Roker, where he said that, look, this is going to be a part where you're going to have an interracial marriage with a white man. There's going to be kissing. There's going to be, you know, interaction. And do you think that's going to be a problem? Do you think you can handle it? He says what she did is that she reached into her purse and pulled out a picture of her husband, and she was actually married to a white Jewish man, you know, and both of them were the parents of, you know, the rocker and actor himself, Lenny Kravitz. You know, this is Lenny Kravitz's mom, and when she showed him that picture, he was like, you got the role. You know, you definitely know what it's like. You know, she lived, you know, in a time where interracial couples were still somewhat of a stigma. And she probably had to deal with some of the negative aspect of that. And, you know, her playing that role as Helen on the Jeffersons was groundbreaking to actually embrace, interracial couples, and that, love is love at the end of the day. And they also talked about, Sherman Hemsley, who is a groundbreaking, monumental talent. Even to this day, Sherman Hemsley was amazing. And they actually found him while he was doing the role of Pearlie. And the role that he played was a role that I played in high school. I played the role of Gitlow Judson, and that was the role that he played. So I kind of found that funny when I saw this episode and I saw that was the role he played in Pearlie. I was like, oh my God, I played that role in high school. That's awesome. Because it's a role that calls for a lot of comedy. It calls for a lot of energy. And Sherman Hemsley was a natural, and immediately Norman Lear was like, that's definitely a person I want to work with. And he definitely had him in mind to play George Jefferson, because originally we all know that the Jeffersons first came about on All in the Family. All in the Family was a groundbreaking show in and of itself, because you had this white, blue collar man by the name of Archie Bunker, who was a bigot. And even though times was changing around him, he still had the same bigot mentality. And, the crazy thing about it is that his next door neighbors were a black family called the Jeffersons. And the people that we saw on the show mainly at first were the role of Lionel, who was played by Mike Evans, and also the role of Louise, who was played by Isabel Sanford. Later on, we saw the role of George. Norman Lear was really kind of fighting, we got to really find this character that can really bring out, the opposite side of Archie Bunker. Not really much the opposite side, but more, the black version of Archie Bunker. And Sherman Hemsley hit the mark. I mean, his scenes with Archie Bunker were legendary, and it really was groundbreaking, in its own right. And they were so good that Norman Lear wanted to do a show based off the Jeffersons, because when he was on All in the Family, George Jefferson only had one store. By the time he got to the Jeffersons, he had 5 stores, and then later on he had 7 stores. So it was great seeing a black man who was an entrepreneur, and his business grew, and as his business grew, so did his lifestyle. So here it is, they moved out of Queens, and they moved to the Upper East Side, to a deluxe apartment in the sky. So it was just a beautiful transition. And Isabel Sanford even admitted that, and I've seen her mention this in other sitcoms, that she really didn't want to leave All in the Family. And Isabel Sanford definitely had a career before getting on All in the Family. She'd appeared in movies. One of the movies that she was known for was playing the maid in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, a movie about an interracial relationship starring Sidney Poitier. And also Bea Richards. But it's a great film. And she really had reservations about going to the Jeffersons, because she says that sometimes a spinoff may not hit. And she wanted to stay on All in the Family because All in the Family was a hit. But they let her know that what's going to happen is that Isabel Sanford is going to be, I'm sorry, not Isabel Sanford, but apologies. But they let Isabel Sanford know that the role of Louise Jefferson is going to be written off of All in the Family, and her character is going to be on the Jeffersons, and if you don't want to make that move, we're going to have to get another actress to play that role. Isabel Sanford said, that made up my mind right then and there. I'm moving. I'm moving on up. And that's exactly what happened. And another thing that really sticks out about the Jeffersons, and I think all of you will agree with me, is that theme song. That theme song is a classic. I mean, all the words to it. That song is so catchy, and it was written and sung by the great Janet Dubois of Good Times, who played Willona. And just a groundbreaking song, and probably one of the best, theme songs of all time, in my opinion. I mean, every time you hear Hey, we're moving on now. You just know it's time for the Jeffersons. So you immediately get glued. I mean, even when I was a little boy and, like around maybe like 5 or 6 years old, I really wasn't able to follow the show at that time because I was a child, but I definitely followed that theme song, and that theme song, every time it came in, it made me feel good. It kind of like gave me like this, like this joy, because it's like, it's a song about moving on up and achieving your dreams, and, now you up in the big leagues, and it's your turn at bat, come on now, that song still, takes me out to this day. I mean, one of the best theme songs of all time. So, and then they also talk about, how they, they began to build the show around George and Louise, now living in this, affluent, they now have this affluent lifestyle, and how they have now adapted to, now being millionaires. And we see that George is pretty much not only an affluent black man, but he's an affluent, bigot black man, and did not have no reservations to tell a white man off, and had no reservations to let somebody have it. And Louise, on the other hand, was still a humble woman, even though she was rich. And at the end of the day, she will tell George off, but she won't allow you to disrespect her husband. So I like that role of Louise, because she was loyal to her man, but when he was out of line, she let him know and had no problems getting him together. And another role that definitely stuck out to me was the role of Mother Jefferson, who was I had it written down. Yes, but definitely the role of Mother Jefferson. It'll come back to me. I apologize, y'all. But the role of Mother Jefferson, she was hilarious because she was the mother-in-law that hated her daughter-in-law. She could not stand Louise, but she loved her son. And it's like no matter what George did, that was her baby. And she loved George. She loved George greatly. And then even let's see. And even like the show even got better once they introduced the role of Florence Johnson, who was played by the great Marla Gibbs. Marla Gibbs is legendary. Love her to pieces. I'm a huge fan of Marla Gibbs, but this was like her groundbreaking role because she had never did comedy before, but she was such a natural. And some of the best lines came from Florence, because Florence was that kind of maid that will tell you off. Yeah, she was a maid, but she wasn't the kind of maid that you was going to push around and tell her what to do. She was that kind of maid that did her job, but if you crossed her, she would let you know. And her risk between her and George Jefferson were just legendary. I even saw some of the episodes earlier today because they actually had a marathon of the Jeffersons tonight. And one episode I remember was when Florence had a man over, and both Louise and George pretty much went off on her about it, and she pretty much decided to quit. But then pretty much she went to Tom and Helen, and they pretty much tried to help her to get her job back. But then George was like, well, only way she's going to get her job back if she starts acting like a proper maid. And she came out dressed like Nanny / Aunt Jemima, and that episode had me in tears the first time I saw it because I was laughing so hard. Because she was just playing the stereotype, and it just annoyed the hell out of George. And it's exactly what she wanted to do. And she's like, oh, you want me to be a proper maid, sir? Oh, no, let me take my... Oh, God, I'd have made you mad. oh, my God, that whole episode just had me laughing. And then eventually, she got George to break down and, and to pretty much apologize. And then that's when she finally got out of the outfit. But, Marla Gibbs was just a monumental talent. And, seeing her on the Jeffersons, definitely was the preface that, that led to her getting, her own show 227. And she was even greater on that show as well. So it was great seeing all of this, great talent being celebrated. And then another thing that really stuck out was how, even though the show was great, they had certain issues. One of the issues was the fact that they kept moving their time slot, and this was like after their fourth season. So within like their fourth and sixth season, I think they kind of fell off the Nielsen ratings because they weren't, people had difficulty finding them. So when you actually have a show and you have a good time slot and everybody knows where to find you, you're able to build your fan base and you're able to get the ratings. But if you're constantly moving, you're kind of losing people, and your actual public, the actual public that that normally would be your show may not see your show now that the slot has changed, and they went through that. But the good thing about it is that in the 80s, the show finally started to pick back momentum again, and it went back into the top 10, as far as the Nielsen ratings. And they also talked about, Isabel winning her Emmy for Best Actress in a Comedy Series. And to this day, she's the only black woman to win that, and it was history that was made. So, Isabel's win was also the win for the Jeffersons as well. And Marla Gibbs, as well as Sherman Hemsley, were nominated multiple times but never won. But Isabel did. So, and another thing they also talked about is that Sherman Hemsley in real life was nothing like George Jefferson. He was actually very shy, very quiet, but had a big heart and was a very kind person and was an introvert. That he was an introvert in real life, but was an extrovert once he was on screen. And that's what made George Jefferson so great, was the fact that in reality he was nothing like George Jefferson, but once he was on stage and once he was on screen, he came to life. I mean, and that's just God-given raw talent. And that's one thing they talked about, as far as Sherman Hemsley, of how much of a natural talent he was. And they also talked about the role of Isabel Sanford. They also talked about Isabel Sanford, that she was nothing like Louise Jefferson, that she really had this very big personality, and she liked, she definitely was a person that everybody got along with, but she had a very big personality, and was more outspoken than Louise actually was. So, if anything, they both, were great talented individuals who brought the role of George and Louise Jefferson to life. And even after the show was off the air, you still kind of saw the two of them together. They were a great team, Sherman Hemsley and Isabel Sanford. They pretty much were like that duo that even after the Jeffersons, they still sometimes will work together. And they were pretty much like America's couple. I mean, they were not only a big thing in the black community, but they were a big thing in America. I mean, people loved the Jeffersons. And the great thing about the Jeffersons, that it actually took on a lot of taboo topics like racism and interracial marriage, and it actually gave a voice to a lot of things that was going on, like in the mid to late 60s and the early 70s, where the racial tensions were literally boiling over, and they were able to say nigger and honky on these episodes, where of course they don't do that now, but especially not on prime time. But then it actually opened the door for different discussions. It actually opened the door for a different way of looking at life and a way of looking at black people, as well as black and white relations as well. So it was definitely it's definitely a show that has definitely left a major impact on many lives. And let's see. So it actually, lasted for 11 seasons, and a lot of them went off to do great things after, the end of the Jeffersons. And then another oh yeah, let me also talk about this. I don't want to forget about this. They also talked about this really big episode they did when George Jefferson gets into it with a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and they kind of go back and forth, and the guy ends up having a heart attack, and George saves his life. And after the guy came to, and he found out that George was the one who actually saved him, he pretty much said, "You should have let me die." But even though he was still stuck in his racism, it actually changed that man's son, and he actually, saw black people in a different light after that moment. Even though it didn't change the stone cold racist man who had the heart attack, his son was changed by it. So it was definitely that kind of show where it actually put racism, it actually put the hard, ugly truth right in your face, but yet you were able to laugh at it, and you were able to see that there is another side of life, and there is a new way of looking at people of color. So, and if anything, we actually saw, like, over the years, we saw that George, who was this radical bigot, who was quick to call a white man a hunky, we started to see after a while that George, as a person, started to evolve, where he was no longer, that aggressive against whites, and that he began to soften he began to kind of like change his ideals about white people. So it was great because, the show actually showed how, over the years, how he began to adapt and how he began to change and how he began to see people differently. So that was great. Now, what I was also going to say is that, after the show had ended, both Sherman Hemsley and Isabel Sanford had a lot of, work after that. They did a lot of appearances in movies and television. Marla Gibbs had a big hit with 227, and loved that show. And they pretty much said that, and then also, Sherman Hemsley, got another big break playing, Deacon Fry on Amen. And we also came to find out that he needed that opportunity because he was broke. And they said that he was very generous and that he wasn't very good with his money. So when it came down to, Sherman Hemsley, by the time he got on Amen, he needed that job. And it was another role that he excelled in. I mean, loved Deacon Fry on Amen. I mean, seeing him with Roz Ryan and, Clifton Davis, I mean, that show was just hilarious. And, Anna Marie Horsford, I mean, just a groundbreaking show in and of its right. And also they talked about, sadly, that they lost a lot of members of the cast. Roxy Welker had passed away in 95. Franklin Cover, he passed, I think, a year later. And then, Mike Evans, who played the role of Lionel, he had passed away. And Paul Benedict, who played the bellsman, and Paul Benedict was really funny on the Jeffersons, he had passed away as well. And then also we, Isabel Sanford had passed away in 2004. And 2012 was when Sherman Hemsley passed. I remember because me and my girlfriend Janelle, she's like my best friend. Me and her was talking about it because we were both big fans of Sherman Hemsley, and we were like, man, it's just like, wow, we really lost, a true comedic genius. I mean, because the guy was just a monumental talent. And even one of the creators and was talking about him because he had actually passed away in El Paso, Texas. He was living in a modest home, and he only had like $50,000 to his name. And he was kind of sad about that because he said that he felt that Sherman Hemsley should have went out better than he did. But, you know, he was also saddened because he misses him, because he said he was such a great person, and people who knew him knew how much of a great person he was. And also they talked about that they had like a real family type of environment on the set. They all got along, and they all, you know, they all were in it together, you know. And that's definitely a beautiful thing, because they were, you know, they were pretty much one of the pioneer shows on television. I mean, hell, if you never had the Jeffersons, we probably wouldn't have had Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder, or, you know, shows like The Haves and the Have-Nots. You know, shows where we're seeing black people in a more positive light, and we're seeing black people who are in charge, and who are, you know, and who are like who are leaders and are not just, you know, laborers. I mean, we actually started to see that, you know, black people, there are no limits to what we can do as a people, and there are no limits to what we can do as a community. And it was great because, you know, the Jeffersons inspired me and inspired so many of us, you know, to be the best that we can be, and that sky is the limit when it comes down to black success as well as, you know, black leadership. So that's what I have, y'all. If y'all definitely want, if I missed anything, put it down in the comments, or if you have some commentary that you want to add, definitely put it down there. And, you know, I'd definitely love to hear from you. But subscribe to my channel. Click that bell so you can get notifications every time I drop a video. Also, I've started a GoFundMe account. You can find that link in the description box as well. Also, like this video, comment on this video, and share this video. And I will be back with the next episode of Unsung Hollywood. I think next week they're doing Tupac Shakur. I definitely look forward to that. So until then, everybody, take care.